And the 920 podcast is back with some brand new energy, a new feel to it after the Vols sweep Vandy and roll into this week against Mississippi State. I'm Logan Quinton. Of course, I'm accompanied by my partner in crime, Charlie Collier. And we have a special guest today. This weekend, the Vols host Mississippi State. And we thought there would be no better time and no better person to bring on than the guy who has been doing the footwork down there, covering the beat for Mississippi State athletics. It's none other than Steve Robertson. Steve, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, happy to be here. Yeah, I've been in Knoxville now for about 24 hours, and it's pretty quiet so far. I'm hoping to see some excitement this weekend, but with this rain, I mean, who knows how things are going to play out.
Yeah, you may need a boat to get around these parts this weekend. Sheesh, it's we knew it was going to be pretty wet, and it's the weather forecast has pretty much lived up to the billing, which you don't really know around these parts. I mean, this time of year it can change so drastically, but yeah, it's we hope we can see some good ball, man. I don't know. They may be able to get it in tonight if there's no lightning. Who knows? And I'm sure one of us will keep it updated on Twitter when we hear of some time changes or game changes or anything like that. But for now, we'll hop right into it. We'll get into the weekend rotation presented by Crumble Cookies. They have an outstanding lineup this week. This one's pretty special. Cookies and cream, buttermilk pancake, triple chocolate chip, strawberry cupcake, of course, the pink sugar and the always reliable chocolate chip cookie. They also have a mystery cookie this week. And the way that I understand it, usually when they do these things, it depends on the location. Knoxville has two locations, Clinton Highway and Parkside Drive. Each location will have its own mystery cookie. So be sure to go check them out. Steve, are you a cookie guy?
How could I not be? I'm from the South, man. We were raised on cookies and Kool-Aid.
Well, we're going to have to, we may have to make a trip to Crumble Cookies. Have you ever been?
I don't think so. Yeah, I've only been up here and covered twice. I covered baseball in 19, and I was here, I guess, in 18 for football. So I've only been in Knoxville a couple times. So I'm still figuring out my favorite places.
Well, we'll go check it out. Like I said, two locations, one in North Knoxville at Clinton Highway, one out west in the Turkey Creek area, Parkside Drive. Can't go wrong with either location. They've got an outstanding lineup this week. And the Vols will have they have a new look lineup in terms of their weekend rotation. And it's worked out well for them the past couple of weeks. What they're going to roll out this weekend is no surprise. It's what's worked the past couple of weekends. Andrew Lindsay, Chase Dolander, and then Drew Beam. And they're going to be matched up with Lindsay with Cade Smith. The TBA is that game 2. And then the Emmett Extras pitcher, Gerangelo Sinja. Am I saying it right, Steve?
Sanji.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
This could get mixed and matched a little bit because of the weather and possibly some delays and postponements. But Steve, tell us about what we can expect from the Bulldogs pitching staff this weekend.
Well, Cade Smith has been the guy they've been, kind of grooming to be the Friday night guy for a while. He pitched against VMI, was just okay, and had a bad outing against Arizona State. Then we didn't see him for 5 weeks. He had an undisclosed ailment he had to deal with. He's been back. He's been really good since he's been back. He's become the pitcher most fans expected to see. Very competitive. Gives up 1 run last weekend at Auburn on a solo home run. That was really all they did. I think that was the first hit of the ball game. I think he got to the first 4 without allowing a hit. So he's been outstanding. It's just been what's behind him. That's been, the Friday games have been competitive since he's been back. But, if State can get him rolling, I think that'll be a big thing down the stretch. The State can ill afford to drop any games they're supposed to win. But that TBA could be Landon Gartman. He's a guy that pitched earlier in the year, and he missed his start last weekend. That's going to probably be a morning time decision. They'll see how he feels when he gets up. I was told last week it was a week to 2 week type deal. Last week they threw Colby Holcomb in game 2, and he was outstanding. But Gartman is the older guy. Gartman's a guy that can probably handle the pressure a little bit better at this point. And then there's, Gerangelo, and they all called him low. But he was midweek guy, then a Friday night guy, and I think you're asking a little bit too much. Put a freshman on Friday. It takes a really special guy to pitch in this league, and he was really good last week. Pitched well enough to win. He was really good against Ole Miss. Did win. And so I think he's a lot more comfortable in the Sunday spot, but he will be a Friday night guy probably in the next year or two.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously like you got your Friday night starter back, and Friday night's been more competitive. And Mississippi State in general has bounced back decently well from an 0-6 start in SEC play. What's kind of, I guess, changed the tide for this team a little bit, where they've been more competitive recently, even had, a series against South Carolina that had every opportunity to win, arguably even could have won that series.
Yeah, well, a lot of getting some guys healthy in the mound, Aaron Nixon's the guy they signed out of the portal from Texas, and he threw opening weekend, and we didn't see him for about 5 weeks. And so he's finally back, pitched really well, got a save on Tuesday nights. They feel good about him. And then they've had, Parker Sinnett's a guy that's sometimes been a starter, sometimes been a middle reliever. He's back, had a really good outing against Ole Miss on Tuesday. And that's really been the issue, is injuries and inconsistency on the mound. And then you have a freshman catcher. I tell people all the time, people think they know, they have no clue. Until you've had to block up an SEC breaking ball with a runner at third and a game on the line, you don't know what you have in your catcher. And so, Ross had a situation at Kentucky. The game-winning run is allowed on a pass on a wild pitch, but that same situation presented itself last weekend, and he slides in front of it. I mean, so as a result, State's doing a better job controlling the running game. Pitchers are doing a better job holding guys accountable. Auburn, I think, had 1 stolen base on the weekend. Ole Miss didn't have any. And so that's been a lot better, because used to a walk was a double. That's just kind of how it was. I mean, the State was so inconsistent throwing strikes. You gift a guy first. You were so bad at holding runners and controlling the running game, you basically put a guy in scoring position immediately. And so that's been cleaned up a lot. And so that's one of the reasons I think this team has been more competitive, is because when they do allow a base hit, it doesn't automatically turn into a scoring situation without the long ball. And so getting some pitchers healthy and then seeing improved play behind the plate has been paramount for this team.
Yeah, I'm real interested in this matchup, Cade Smith and Andrew Lindsey. I really like Cade Smith. I mean, you mentioned the undisclosed injury, but since he's been back, I mean, in SEC play, I think he's at like 15 innings and only giving up 5 earned. And he's coming off probably his best outing, right? Last week against Auburn.
Yeah, and so Cade's a guy too. Honestly, the only reason he's in school is because of the abbreviated draft in 2020. I mean, they had a full draft that year. He's probably drafted and likely signs, even though he always wanted to play at Mississippi State. I mean, with the changes, the way the MLB draft was structured back then, State really benefited, because he's not a kid that normally comes to school, and he's been battling with injuries the entire time he's been here. And so that was last year down the stretch. People forget, he took a ground ball off the forehead at Arkansas in the one game that State won at Arkansas, and he's a big reason why. But the number one thing with Cade that I think really sets him apart from most pitchers, people talk about having dog in him. He's got dog in him. He's not scared to compete. He trusts his stuff. He's not going to quit. He's not like, if the breaking ball is not working, he'll find another way to get you out. He's just one of those guys. He's not going to go through a batting practice. He's an ultra competitor that has really good stuff. When he has the 3-pitch mix, he's deadly. And I would put him up against anybody in the country when he's on. But the problem has been injuries, and so you finally get him back, and you finally feel like he's realizing his potential. So, yeah, if the ball game is played tonight or tomorrow, whenever it is, I expect a competitive ball game. I don't think it'll be anything like what we saw last year on Thursday.
Charlie mentioned it. This team was able to salvage a series against South Carolina. They took a series from Bama and Ole Miss. I mean, you think back to the way they looked against Vandy that week against Vandy. I think they've definitely grown a little bit, and but there's a tough slate left to go. I mean, Tennessee, Arkansas, LSU, A&M. I mean, this time last week, you're probably thinking this team could pretty easily get to 10 wins, but now it's gonna, after the way Tennessee looked last weekend, that road's gonna be a lot tougher. It really feels like they're gonna have to ride this offense for State, right?
Yeah, I mean, offense is really the key, but that's the thing. The way this league has been so unpredictable this year. I mean, it's like, Tennessee gets swept by Missouri. I mean, nobody in Missouri won't win 10 games in the league this year, right? And
Right.
up Arkansas, and then everybody's leaving them for dead, and they go sweep Vanderbilt. See, I mean, you never know one weekend to the next which team's going to show up. And really the same thing for Arkansas. Who thought Georgia would sweep Arkansas last? And so what State's just got to grind out and try to win today's game. They can't worry about next week or Memorial Day or getting a Hoover. They just got to try to find a win today. Because you start counting those potential wins, you get yourself in all kind of trouble. The reality of it is this team's going to make the tournament. They're going to have 13 SEC wins, which means 7-5 down the stretch. And as you mentioned, that schedule is not exactly advantageous. I would submit State probably has as difficult or one of the most difficult remaining schedules in the conference, whereas Ole Miss probably has the easiest. With Missouri and Alabama and Auburn. I can't remember their fourth team, but we're 3 games ahead of Ole Miss. But I won't be the least bit surprised that if Ole Miss chases State for that last spot in Hoover, and just getting to Hoover is just not enough for Mississippi State. I mean, that like our fans, there's an expectation to win here every single year. And it's not a deal where it's like, hey, we took some improvement. It's like, if you're not in a hosting discussion, you're failing. That's just kind of how things are.
Steve, you mentioned it briefly. You don't expect, obviously, Friday to be non-competitive, and you referenced last year's series. But, last year, Tennessee went into Starkville during a pretty dark period for Mississippi State last year and combined to score 41 runs to Mississippi State's 10, including a 27-2 victory in that first game, the largest margin of victory in an SEC game in program history. And it was the most runs that Mississippi State had given up since like 70s, 60s, I believe. Is there any kind of extra juice, extra motivation for this team on, knowing that Tennessee did kind of sort of embarrass them a year ago? Have you heard any talk of that being, an extra motivating factor?
I don't think so. And I don't know that that's when you look at where State is up against the wall, I don't think it matters who you play. And, you mentioned that 27-2 ball game, State should have won on Friday. State loses that ball game against Tennessee 4-3, and they're competitive in the third game too, and it's kind of got away from them. But the only game anybody remembers is that Thursday game because the score was so grotesque. But if they bounce back and win that Friday game, who knows what happens on Saturday. But the reality of it is this is a team that's got decent leadership. You don't have that Tanner Allen, Jake Mangum, Brent Rooker type guy that's going to carry a team by any stretch. But they understand you have to manage every single day. You start chasing what happened last year and start playing emotional baseball, you're going to put yourself in a deficit. And so I don't think that there is a revenge factor in this ball game. I think the bottom line is that State needs to win SEC games. I mean, they've lost one midweek game the entire year, which was a complete joke. But the reality of it is this team's back's against the wall, and it doesn't matter if they're playing Tennessee, LSU, or the New York Yankees. They got to go out there today and play the best baseball they can in hopes of salvaging something of the season.
So, Steve, when Mississippi State is playing their best baseball, when they've found ways to win games, when they've looked like a team that's capable of getting the SEC tournament and winning some games there, potentially even, finding their way into a regional, what does that look like for Mississippi State? What is the version of this Bulldog baseball team that can go out and win games?
Well, going to sound really basic, and I don't mean it to, but it is because the issues have been pretty common. You throw strikes, you play clean defense, and you get 2 out base hits. And that's the same for all of us. But when, if you go look at some of State's big innings, a lot of times it's a 2-out rally. That's one thing I will say with this team. There's not any quit in them. Even like when they had the ball game against Oklahoma out at Frisco, Oklahoma gets a lead, kind of separates a little bit. State comes right back and takes a lead. So Luke Hancock and those guys, Kellum Clark, they understand that it's a 9-inning game. So they don't quit if they have like a train wreck type inning. But what you've got to have is good pitching on the mound so things don't cascade. And when State has been beat poorly, And that's how it was early in the conference. Things have been a lot more competitive here the last month or so. But in the beginning, they couldn't throw strikes. They couldn't play defense. And then all of a sudden the pressure shifts to your offense. So everybody starts taking, selfish swings, trying to hit a 5-run homer to get back in a ball game. And so, but it all starts at pitching. When the pitching is there, the defense plays well, and then the offense can afford to be patient. So, the key for Mississippi State this weekend and every weekend is just be competitive on the mound. Go out there and make guys hit their way on. And when State is issuing free passes, it gets really ugly. And fortunately, they haven't had, a lot like that as of late. That Saturday game against Alabama kind of got away from them a little bit. But, by and large, when State's been healthy on the mound and willing to compete and put their stuff in there and make guys hit their way on, they've been a pretty tough out. But I listen, it's been a disappointment. I mean, that's at the end of the day. Last year, people thought it was an outlier. I mean, you lose Landon Sims to injury and Brooks Auger and Stone Simmons, and you kind of have some mercy, right? Well, this year, when you go out and you hit the portal as hard as they did, a lot of people felt like State might have had the best portal class in the conference outside of LSU. And then this is where we are. Been chasing the season, the entire SEC slate, and that just won't get it done in Starkville. I mean, we had almost 17,000 people come to the ball game the other day to watch State beat Ole Miss. But those people are caretakers and investment people in Bulldog baseball, and they're not going to keep showing up and spending money just for the fun of it. It's not just about a barbecue and who's got the best drinks out there in the outfield. You got to be able to win ball games at Mississippi State. And when you don't win ball games, then there's trouble. And Chris Amonis and I talked about that last summer when I interviewed him one day. He goes, yeah, it's tough to win here. He goes, but it's even harder to lose here. And that's because, there's some of these schools out there. State's a baseball school. Some people kind of run from that label, but you don't go build that cathedral of a stadium that we have in Starkville and call yourself a basketball school. I mean, that's just not reality. But the expectations at Mississippi State are much different than they are a lot of other places. It's not about, hey, we've had a senior-laden team make a good run to Omaha. That was really sweet. State fans expect to be in the mix for major things in the postseason every single year. And that's something, the weight of that is something that I think the average baseball player can't carry. And so you go out there, I hate to talk trash about him, but I love Nick Mingione to death at Kentucky, but you're getting 400 and 500 fans at a ball game, right? And so you go out there and make a mistake there, most people don't even notice. You go make a mistake in front of 15,000 people screaming your name, it's a much bigger deal. And there are a lot of people that don't have the fortitude to handle the expectations of this program. And I think State struggled with that some on the recruiting trail, identifying those guys with the toughness to embrace the expectations and play at a high level.
What does the future look like, do you think, when you factor in, you're past the honeymoon year, right? And you're far removed now. And like you said, there's a lot of eyes on this team, high expectations for this program. And it's an interesting mix in terms of different classes of guys you have on this particular team. What do you think next year looks like in terms of guys staying or leaving?
Well, there's a good young nucleus of guys that have been together for a while, and that helps. Like, Hunter Hines is not draft eligible, so he'll be back next year. And he and Ross Highfield were high school teammates, and Ross is a guy that we think will be a first or second draft pick in a couple of years at catcher. And then you've got Dakota Jordan, who's not draft eligible this year, turned down a bunch of money to come to school. He's got at least another year. Kellum Clark is a guy we do think will be drafted. They'll have to hit the portal and probably get an outfielder or two. You could probably use a little more right-handed power. But there's a young nucleus of position players to go along with Bradley Lofton, who is a guy we're extremely high on. He's had some arm issues as of late, but he's a future weekend guy too, probably. And a guy that throws 95 from the left with an 85-mile-an-hour slider and a 78-mile-an-hour changeup, And so somebody's cat just said hello. But the reality of it is that, you've got to go get some guys that are kind of stopgap guys that can kind of fill in. But most of this team will be back next year, especially the young stars and young talent. Of course, with the NCAA transfer portal, who knows how things are going to go in life. I mean, you can't. That's the thing. I think that fans feel somewhat kind of removed from their teams. It's almost like you don't want to go out and buy your favorite player's jersey because you may be playing for your opponent next year. And so, but yeah, baseball is a little different animal. There's not as much of that. There's not as much poaching that goes on, obviously. But I think people feel good about the future. It's just a matter of can they salvage something this year and have a little juice heading into 2024?
As far as the Mississippi State offense, that's what's real interesting to me, because when you really dive into it, you find out that this offense can really hang with anybody, and it's different guys doing it. I mean, you got Amani Larry that's top 10 in runs scored in the league. Hunter Hines top 10 in RBI. Colton Ledbetter is tied for third in home runs. And State as a team ranks in the top half of every offensive category. And particularly, I think, to find out their propensity to get on base, whether via walk or just, by any means, I think that speaks volumes to, like you said, kind of that scrappy nature, that don't quit attitude with some on the club. But man, how are they going to produce enough offense this weekend to overcome the mismatch on the pitching side of things?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? I mean, it's like when you look at what Tennessee has done in some ball games, they've put up some double-digit numbers with regularity. Now, granted, this is not the offense it was last year in Knoxville.
Right.
I honestly think playing the 2 night games actually helps State in that respect too. I mean, it's been my experience. Obviously, you guys are out there a lot more, but the ball doesn't carry as well to left at Lindsey Nelson at night. And one of the old timers when I was here in 19 said, "Oh yeah, that cold mountain air comes down. It's almost like a force field out there." I know the ball carries out some to right, even at night. And with Hunter Hines and Kellum Clark, you feel like State could be able to compete there. But the bottom line is, in order for State to win a game this weekend and possibly 2, which I'm not expecting, they're going to have some guys have season best type performances on the mound. I do think that there's not a lot of breaks in this lineup. There is length in this lineup, and they had Kellum Clark hitting in the 7-hole a lot of the year, and that's a guy with double-digit home runs. And so I feel like this offense can compete. I'm interested to see how they attack Dollander. I mean, he's one of my favorite pitchers in the conference. He's a big leaguer. I think we all see it that way. But can they get to Lindsey? State's best chance to win this thing may be the Smith versus Lindsey matchup. I think State's got to have him go deep in a ball game. And honestly, I think if this thing ends up going to 2 7s, maybe that's an advantage for State too, because that's 4 less innings you got to cover with a leaky bullpen. And so,
yeah.
But the reality of it is they need some guys to have a big weekend. Hunter Hines and Dakota Jordan didn't have a great weekend at Auburn, but they had a few big swings there. Both of them had huge weekends against Ole Miss. But it's interesting, too, that there are 3 right-handed starters for Tennessee. That's the first time this year State has faced that in conference. And so with all those power hitters on the left-hand side, that could be an advantage. But State's got to win those matchups in order to make this series competitive.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned, again, Hines and Dakota Jordan. And, if State's going to come in and win a game or try to win this series, are those the 2 guys that you think most need to step up? Is there like one specific matchup that you think this series could kind of hinge on, one specific factor? Or, is it just a combination, again, like you've been saying, clean defense and getting some guys to hit?
Well, I think Hines needs a big weekend, that for sure, because, the right-handed, left-handed matchup kind of favors him. But, listen, I don't think State's going to score a ton of runs in this ball game. And I certainly don't think, without some help from Tennessee pitching, you're going to string together multi-hit innings, So in somewhat, you're kind of relying on the long ball. And so, State's got to be able to cash in when they get mistake pitches. They got to be able to make the Tennessee pitching pay for that. And so, again, I don't see an inning where you're going out there putting 3 or 4 hits together and stringing these things together and going station to station. State's a team, too, that's one of the leaders in the conference in doubles. You got to be able to do that. You got to be able to get guys on and get them around. And you're not going to be able to just piecemeal this thing together. State's got to put some big swings together against Tennessee pitching. And that's really the big challenge, is will they be able to do that?
Steve, a few questions here, miscellaneous type stuff that, pertains to the SEC, but also a couple that pertains to the Vols. I was wondering, as a person in your seat, that, whether it be an opposing fan base or someone on the beat or just another club around the SEC, seeing what Tennessee did last weekend and the nature that they did it, when you mentioned it, there was a narrative out there that, they were left for dead. by most. What did that do for your perspective, and what do you think it does for those around the league after seeing what Tennessee did last weekend, considering the changes that they made and the way they made it work?
Yeah, I think people have been waiting for Tennessee to wake up, right? I mean, you're number one seed in the tournament last year, and all of a sudden you're 5-10 in the league. You start thinking, man, this is a team that may be 500 in league play, and then they go out and sweep Vanderbilt. But yeah, I think most people were kind of hoping Tennessee would wake up next week. You know what I mean? I think state fans were thinking, hey, all of a sudden that series looks a little more manageable. Maybe we can go up there and steal that thing. And then Tennessee wakes up, but they're hot down the stretch, whatever. Listen, Tony's a great coach, and I know he's a polarizing figure in his conference. I think Tony's been good for base. Now, I don't agree with everything he's done, obviously. His temper gets the better of him sometimes. But, Tony recruits guys that are alpha dogs, and they play with an alpha dog mentality. And sometimes that's a detriment, too. I mean, when you have some adversity, all of a sudden you start thinking, well, am I not as good as I think I am, But I think a lot of people are still they respect this Tennessee team. And granted, it's not the team it was last year, but how could it be, right? I mean, there's no way they would be Tennessee did some historic things last year, but they're still a great team, and they've played beneath their potential. And I think now they're kind of figuring some things out, and, we'll see. And I think Mississippi State fans we're kind of hoping they'd figure it out next weekend. But anytime you go on the road in this league, it's tough, man. And it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what the records are. Everybody out there's got one or two pitchers a weekend that gets hot, and you just hope you don't run into them at the wrong time. And so, we'll see what happens. If these changes hold, it's like other than bringing the fur jacket back and all that kind of stuff, it's not a big fan of that. But the reality of it is that's the identity of this program, right? I mean, and Tony has to be Tony, right? I mean, that's the thing with all this stuff that goes on, and no matter what everybody thinks about him, you got to coach your team the way you know how to coach your team. And as much as I don't like the fur jacket stuff, I respect the fact that Tony's kind of getting back to what made Tennessee so great last year.
So to follow that up, 2021 Mississippi State, obviously they start the year highly ranked and not to the same degree as Ole Miss last year, but they hit a little bit of a midseason lull. Lost a series to Missouri at home before they catch fire again at the end of the year, going into the tournament, win a national championship. And then, Ole Miss last year started the season highly ranked, hit a big midseason lull, barely got into the tournament, won a national championship. Do you draw any similarities having covered Mississippi State and then just being in the same state as Ole Miss to those two teams, to Tennessee?
Well, State was a top 8 national seed in 2021.
Right.
State was in position to win the SEC championship and then blew it against Missouri. Ole Miss was the last team in the tournament last year. And to be quite honest with you, if we didn't have an SEC rep on the tournament, that we needed to get 9 teams in, Ole Miss doesn't get in, and then what do they do? And I think that's the thing. And I traded some messages with some other guys in Tennessee media. In 2021, the best team in college baseball was Arkansas, but they weren't the best team at the end of the year. In 2022, no question, Tennessee was the best team in college baseball. They had 2 bad weekends all year, right? You lose to Kentucky, and then you lose the Super Regional. You just picked a bad time to have a bad weekend. The similarity, I would say, is that there really is no similarity in the fact that there's a consistency in the College World Series is not about crowning the best team, the national champion. It's about crowning the hottest team in the country the last 6 weeks of the year as a national champion. Because, if you put Tennessee and Ole Miss together, those rosters intact at their best last year, and you play 10 times, Tennessee's winning that 9 out of 10 times. And probably the 10th time Elko's hitting the walk-off homer, where the ball just meets the bat. But the reality of it is we don't always – it's not like football, right? You have to go out there and consistently play, and that's what makes college baseball such an amazing game. It's just like what we saw on Tuesday night. Georgia State beats Georgia. Tennessee Tech beat Tennessee earlier this year. If you don't go out there and bring it every day and you're a member of this conference, I mean, you are a program-defining win for somebody else. So in the midweek, we all get everybody's best shot, which makes us better in the postseason in the long run. But the reality of it is, it doesn't matter how great you are. There's only been one number 1 seed since we went to super regional format. There's only been one number one seed to win an AFL championship, and that was Miami the very first year. So it's almost a curse to be the number one team, because no matter who you get, you're going to be the hunted rather than the hunter. And I think that's the thing last year when all the things that happened, with Notre Dame, that Notre Dame team in 2021 was better than a team in 2022. But which one goes to Omaha? 1989 Mississippi State baseball team, arguably the greatest team in school history. They get upset in a regional and don't get to go. And then the next year is supposed to be a rebound. 1990 Mississippi State goes to Omaha. And that's the thing. It makes college baseball so unpredictable. You just never know from 1 week to the next, 1 year to the next, how things are going to happen. But is Tennessee capable of winning an AFL championship? They absolutely are. They absolutely are. And I think that's the thing, too, is you got to right the ship as you get into the month of May. You got to go into the month of May playing your best baseball. And now last weekend, there's some indications maybe Tennessee is. But I think maybe the disappointment of last year can be fuel for this team now. It's like, okay, we had some adversity earlier in the year, but now here we are right back in the thick of things. Just put us in a tournament somewhere. Make us a number two, whatever. We just want another chance. And so I think it's a great thing. But the reality of it is that's what makes the College World Series and our regional format so fun, is because you never know when Coastal Carolina or Fresno State are going to show up.
A couple of the changes that the Vols, or the most significant change that they've made to kind of, get back into the thick of it, as you mentioned, is Chase Burns and his role. I wanted to ask you about that. And I mean, it's been outstanding ever since they slotted him into that relief role. 9 1/3, 13 K to 2 walks, only 1 earned run. I mean, and Charlie and myself were there last Friday, that Vanderbilt game. It was one of the craziest things I've ever seen, because from the standpoint of, it was a great pitching duel, but as a spectator or media person, you're sitting there saying, okay, great pitching performance from the Vols, but it's the same old story for this offense. Lackluster offense. The Zane Denton hit a solo shot the beginning of the game, and that was it. And then, Chase Burns comes in, or the Vols tie it up, and then Chase Burns comes in, and to go from like such a low energy, game with not a lot of offense, and then to kind of cap it off with Chase Burns and his electric performance at the end. It was pretty special, and I didn't know if he's reminiscent of anyone you've seen in the college game, as far as, someone who changes the role and finds some improvement like that, or a gadget guy like a Kevin Kopps that you can use as a starter, relief, long relief, doesn't matter. I know Landon Sims, he's one that comes to mind that's similar, but anybody that comes to your mind that reminds you of Chase Burns and what can potentially happen going forward with his role?
Well, we've had some guys like that in the past that maybe perhaps they just weren't comfortable, and then all of a sudden they just want to find a way to contribute. I mean, while their stuff is much different, we had a guy named Houston Harding in 21 that, if State doesn't win an AFL championship without him, State doesn't make it to Omaha without that guy. And he was a midweek guy, just kind of moving along, and threw 3 variations of the change. And then they let him start against Missouri, and he gets rocked, and everybody thinks, okay, he's just a midweek pitcher. And the next thing you know, he's on the mound in Omaha pitching against Texas. I mean, it's like you need guys that are humble enough to be willing to take on whatever role the team needs. And I think that's where you are with Chase. I mean, how many people would have pouted, right? I mean, how many people would have said, okay, well, that's it, but it's clear he understands he has a future and a role in this team. And credit Tony and the guys for helping him make that transition, because you're right. If he doesn't show up last weekend, it's a much different story today, right? I mean, all of a sudden you lose that ball game. How does that change the complexion of the series? And so I'm eager to see him pitch in person again. And, we'll see how things go with that. But, I'm continuing to wait. I'll see this rain falling all around me. I know that the field itself is in good shape. I just wonder about the fan experience, and, we'll see. But if it's not raining hard, I don't know what it's going to be doing here in a couple of hours, but I hope we get a baseball game in the day, and for sure I hope we get in 3 in the weekend, because both of these teams need to play these 3 games.
Charlie, you have anything before we let Steve go?
I do want to ask, just completely unrelated to baseball, your favorite place to eat in Starkville. It has my favorite food in the SEC. I just want to know what your favorite place is.
That's a good question. It depends on what I'm in the mood for. I love Bulldog Burger Company. They're in the district. But if I'm taking the wife out to eat, I'm probably going to Harvey's. Harvey's right there on 12, just south of campus. I love going in there. I love the atmosphere there. It's you don't have to dress up, but you can. You're going to be comfortable either way. The food's outstanding. It's an institution in Starkville. Kind of like going to Malone's in Lexington, places like that. I mean, every SEC town has a couple little spots that are kind of uniquely their place, and Harvey's is uniquely Starkville. So next time you're in town, go to Harvey's. Tell them I said get something free out of it.
I'm a fan of Harvey's. I'm also a fan of Bulldog Burger, but no, I think I go the wings at Two Brothers. I love the rub that they have there. I'm a big Two Brothers guy.
I ate there about a week ago, and I had the pulled pork grilled cheese sandwich, which was outstanding.
Oh man,
and onion rings.
Just curious, yeah. No, I'm a Starkville, in my opinion, best college town in America. I love Starkville, so I always like to ask people.
What's so funny to me is like there's so many people that have negative opinions of Starkville that have never been. It's like that's like, okay, well I'm gonna give you an album review of the new Motley Crue album. I haven't listened to it yet, but I'm just gonna write a review. It's like people just repeat the same old tired phrases, and like it's like there'll be these old guard SEC writers that hadn't been here since the 90s, and they're like, oh well, Starkville's this. I'm like, when the last time you were here? 93, 94. It's like, dude, shut up. Things change.
Awesome stuff, guys. Well, we hear the rain coming down around you. Like you said, it's pretty consistent. Charlie, you said you had an update that in Nashville it's just pouring down. Good thing they're playing on turf now. Won't get muddy at least, but one thing that I think is going to continue to get muddy is the league, the SEC. You mentioned it, Steve. Kind of don't know what to expect with some of these clubs. And I think it's going to be a Royal Rumble, like at least a 12-team Royal Rumble to the end. Do you think it's just everything's going to get more mucked up as we go on these last few weekends, or do you think someone can separate themselves in this conference?
Well, I like chaos, unless
Yeah.
we're but I like that. I think it adds intrigue, but I really like this South Carolina team. After seeing it in person. And listen, I said at the beginning of the year that Kentucky was going to be better than people gave them credit for. I said, Kentucky's a tournament team, and everybody said, you're crazy. Well, now they're 3 SEC wins away from having 14. They're making the tournament,
Yeah.
They need a good weekend this weekend, which is going to be tough. But the reality of it is, in order for the game to grow, it can't just be State, LSU, Ole Miss, and Arkansas every year. It can't be. We've got to have Tennessee be good. We've got to have Florida be good. And that's not just because we want the SEC to be good. We want, I want the SEC to dominate the NCAA tournament. And then we could just have, Hoover 2.0 when we get to Omaha, because best baseball conference in America is in the Southeastern Conference. And so I think it adds to the intrigue and the league, but also too, I think people know when they get across the field from a Southeastern Conference team, you better bring it every single time, because there's never going to be – you got to fight us all for 27 outs. It's not going to be a situation where it's going to show up and be cute and go through the motions. It's a war in this league. I think that's one of the reasons that you've seen so many SEC teams win the national championship in the last decade.
Yeah, I totally agree. Me and Charlie are with you on South Carolina. We've been beating that drum since the start of the season. Not sure we expect them to be in this spot where, in my opinion, I think if somebody does separate, it's them. I don't think it's LSU, because once you get past game 1 or Friday night, whatever you want to call it, LSU's kind of vulnerable. And then we saw last week with Vandy, some question marks with their pitching staff in terms of injury, plus their offense is cooling down. Tennessee looks alive now. I can't wait for it, man. I'm pumped about it. I know some of our fan base was kind of, jumping out of the pool, so to speak, when Tennessee was going through their struggles. But man, I just want to tell everybody, like, latch onto this sport, not just the program, because it's so awesome. Like you said, it's the best team, it's the best league in the country, and it's absolute chaos. And once you latch onto it in true form, you don't want to let it go, despite your team not doing what they should be doing and all the frustrations that come with that. This sport is special, man, and it's awesome. I can't wait to see what unfolds. Going to May and then ultimately to Omaha.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, thank you guys for having me too. I appreciate the chance to come on talk little college baseball, and thanks for welcoming me to Knoxville. And hopefully we get a chance to go eat some cookies. So
yeah, man, I got you on that. I got you. We definitely will. We'll see what game times may or may not change, and we'll figure something out. But regardless, definitely we'll see you at one of these games. And yeah, till next time, Steve. We appreciate it. Hats off to you for joining us, and we'll catch up with you next time.
best of luck to you guys.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.